To your cell now Leon wiped the blood from his arm with the back of his hand. His breathing heavy but controlled, he didn't argue, turning his back on Blaze. He started toward his cell, but he could feel the gang leader eyes boring into him, his smirk a promise of more to come. As he reached the threshold of his cell, Blaze's voice echoed behind him, "We're just getting started, soldier boy, sleep." With one eye open, Lon stepped inside. The cold steel door slammed shut behind him. His hands braced against the wall, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. He glanced at the thin cut on his arm, then at the pale reflection of himself in the small mirror above the sink. For the first time in years he felt something unfamiliar. Vulnerability. This wasn't the battlefield he was trained for out there. He had his team, his weapons, a mission in. Here he had nothing but his instincts, and the ghosts of what he used to be. And men like Blay weren't going to stop until he was broken or dead. Lon took a deep breath, pushing the fear aside. He couldn't afford to let it consume him. Not here, not now. In the distance he could still hear Blaze's laughter, faint but haunting. The fight was over, but the war had just begun. The dim glow of the corridor lights seeped through the narrow slot in Leon's cell door, casting faint, distort-edged shadows on the cold, cracked walls. He lay on the thin mattress, his body still tense from the earlier fight. The cut on his arm throbbed faintly, but the pain wasn't what kept him awake. It was the voices. The iron fangs were loud tonight, their taunts carrying through the silence like a cruel lullaby. Better keep one eye open, soldier boy, one sneered from down the hall. The voice was sharp, grating, designed to crawl under his skin. Another voice chimed in, dripping with malice. "Don't matter how tough you are, Carter. You bleed just like the rest of us." Laugh echoed, bouncing off the walls in waves. They were relentless, testing him even now. When the bars separated them, Lon turned onto his side, staring at the wall. His muscles coiled tight. Their words weren't just noise, they were a promise. He'd seen men in here crumble under less. Every taunt was a reminder that he wasn't invincible. His mind drifted back to the attack, the speed of it, the raw violence, the way Blaze had hung back, letting his men take the first swing, while he watched like a predator toying with its prey. They hadn't even been trying to kill him, not yet. It was a test, a warning. The Raol storm was still coming. Lion's breath came slow and steady, but his chest felt heavy. This wasn't the battlefield. He knew there were no clear objectives, no comrades to cover his six. In the military he'd been the shadow, a name whispered with respect, even fear, but here he was just another target. Another voice pierced the quiet. "How's it feel, war hero, being locked up with the scum you thought you were?" Better than. Leon's jaw tightened. The words stung more than he cared to admit. He closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to steady, but even in the silence of his mind the voices followed his own. Thoughts betrayed him, whispering fears. He tried to bury. What if Jessica couldn't clear his name? What if he didn't survive long enough to get out? What if the Iron Fangs made good on their threats? No, he couldn't think like that. He wouldn't. Leon sat up abruptly, the mattress creaking beneath him. His hands ran over his face, rough with stubble, before dropping to his lap. His heart beat heavily in his chest, but his mind clung to a single thread. He had to stay Strong getting out of this prison wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. The people who framed him thought they could bury him here, silence him forever. They didn't realize they'd put him in a place where his instincts, his training, would keep him alive. Leaning back against the wall, Leon let his eyes roam over the small cramped cell. He studied every detail, the scuffs on the floor, the peeling paint, the faint graffiti carved into the metal bed frame. This was his battleground. Now his gaze landed on the narrow window high above the cell, its dirty glass offering only a sliver of the night sky, the faintest glimmer of stars peeked through, a cruel reminder of the world outside, a world he needed to return to. He thought of his mother's face, the way her hands trembled when she hugged him before the trial, the tears she tried to hide when the guilty verdict was read. He thought of Jessica, her sharp determination, her promise to uncover the truth. They were counting on him to survive, to hold on long enough for justice to find him. Another voice from the cells broke the stillness. Carter, time's running out. Leon exhaled, sharply gripping the edge of the bed frame until his knuckles turned white. Fear coiled in his stomach, but he didn't let it show. He couldn't afford to. The men taunting him, the ones circling like sharks, they wanted to see him break. Not tonight, not ever. He forced himself to lie back down, his head resting on the thin pillow. The voices continued, a relentless tide of hatred and malice, but he let them fade into the background. His focus turned inward, his thoughts sharpening like the edge of a blade. The iron fangs wanted him afraid, they wanted him broken before they struck again, but Lion wouldn't give them that satisfaction. As his breathing steadied and his eyes drifted closed, he made a silent vow he would survive this place. He would outlast the threats, the violence, the fear, and when the time came, he would expose the truth about the iron fangs, about the warden, about the people who thought they could destroy him. Leon Carter wasn't a man to be underestimated, and if the voices in the dark thought otherwise, they would learn soon enough. The next morning, Leon sat in the visitation room, his broad shoulders slumped slightly as the tension of the last few nights weighed heavily on him. The pale fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glow, reflecting off the scratched plexiglass that separated him from Jessica Green. Her sharp, determined eyes locked onto his, but the look in his own was harder to read, strained, distant, shadowed by fear he wouldn't admit aloud. Jessica adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the small metal speaker built into the table. Leon, she began, her voice steady but brimming with urgency. I've got some good news. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but the guarded expression on his face didn't shift. Good news, he echoed, his voice low and rough, tinged with exhaustion. She nodded. I found a way to fast-track your appeal. The discrepancies in the evidence, the missing files, it's too much for the judge to ignore. If all goes well, I think I can get you out of here in a week. For a moment her words hung in the air like a lifeline tossed to a drowning man. Leon wanted to reach for it, to let hope take root, but as quickly as the feeling came, it was smothered by the cold, relentless reality of where he was. A week, he said quietly, almost to himself. He leaned back in his chair, his hand rubbing at the back of His neck, Jessica, I don't know if I can make it another week in this place. Her expression faltered, the resolve in her eyes softening. Leon, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You've survived things most people can't even imagine. You can make it. He shook his head, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. This isn't the battlefield, Jessica. Out there I had my team, my weapons, a mission. In here, he paused, his hand gesturing to the walls around them. In here it's just me, and every second, every minute I'm waiting for the next hit to come. They're not going to stop until they break me. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the notepad in her lap. The iron fangs, he nodded grimly. They came at me last night. It wasn't a full assault, it was a warning. Blay made sure I knew what's coming, and the worst part, they're enjoying this, the taunts, the games. They know I'm a target, and it's only a matter of time before they finish the job. Jessica leaned forward, her tone shifting from empathetic to resolute. Listen to me, Leon, I know it's hell in here, but you're stronger than them. You faced worse, and you've come out the other side. You just have to hold on a little longer. I'm working around the clock to get you out. Leon's gaze dropped to the table, his hands clasped tightly together. And what happens if they get to me before then? What if all this work you're doing is for nothing because I didn't make it to the end? His voice cracked slightly, a rare moment of vulnerability slipping through. Jessica hesitated, searching for the right words. That's not going to happen, she said firmly, though even she couldn't hide the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I'll figure something out, maybe. I can push for you to be moved to solitary for protection, or get the warden to put you in a safer block. Leon let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. The warden doesn't care, Jessica. If anything, I think he's part of the reason I'm in here in the first place. Solitary just makes it easier for them to get to me without anyone noticing. Her shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of his words hitting her. Then you have to stay vigilant, keep your head down, don't engage unless you absolutely have to. You just need to last one more week. Lon met her gaze, his eyes filled with something between frustration and desperation. You say that like it's easy. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them. Every step I take, I feel them watching there, waiting. Jessica, waiting for me to slip. And I'm. He stopped himself, swallowing hard. You're what she pressed gently. I'm tired, he odded, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how much more I can take. Jessica's expression softened, and she pressed her palm against the plexiglass as though trying to reach him. Leon, I need you to dig deep for your mother, for yourself. You're not just fighting for survival, you're fighting for justice, for your name. Don't let them take that from you. He exhaled slowly, her words sinking in. I'll try, that's all I can promise right now. I'll try. The guard appeared at the door, signaling the end of their visit. Jessica stood gathering her things quickly. I'll be back in a couple of days with updates. Stay sharp. Leon, you're not alone in this. Leon rose, towering over the table as he gave her a small nod. Thanks, Jessica, for everything. As she left, the weight of her promise hung heavily in the air. A week, 7 days, it felt like an eternity as Leon walked back to his cell. The faint laughter of the iron fangs echoed from somewhere down the corridor, a haunting reminder of the danger that loomed over every moment. He didn't know if he could survive another week, but he'd have to try. The cell was quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead the only constant sound. Leon sat on the edge of his thin mattress, staring at the concrete wall in front of him. Jessica's words lingered in his mind. You just need to last one more week. But here a week was a lifetime. A week meant enduring more threats, more taunts, and possibly another attack. He couldn't just sit and wait. He needed to act. Lion's hands rested on his knees, his fingers twitching as he thought his training had always been about preparation, anticipating the enemy's moves and staying one step ahead. And while he didn't have his gear or his team, he still had his instincts. Those instincts had kept him alive in death deserts, jungles, and urban war zones. They'd have to work here too. He rose from the bed and began to scan his small cell with fresh eyes, every crack, every corner, every piece of his limited possessions was suddenly a resource. His gaze landed on the handle of his toothbrush. It wasn't much, but with a little effort it could become something. He snapped the bristles off and began to grind the plastic end against the rough concrete floor. The repetitive motion was grounding, giving his restless hands something to do while his mind calculated. It wasn't just about having a weapon, it was about sending a message. If the Iron Fangs came for him again, they needed to know he wouldn't go down without a fight. The next day, during the brief free time in the yard, Lion moved with purpose. The open space was a dangerous place, filled with watchful eyes and simmering tensions. The Iron Fangs stayed in their usual spot, Blaze's presence unmistakable as he laughed with his gang, clearly enjoying the attention. His dominance brought Lion kept his distance, moving toward the far corner of the yard where a cluster of older inmates lingered. They weren't part of any gang, just men who had learned how to survive by keeping their heads down and staying out of the way. He approached a wee man with grey streaks in his beard, who went by the name Mac. Mac was known for his connections, a man who could get things done without drawing too much attention. Mac, Leon said quietly, nodding in greeting. The older man glanced up, his sharp eyes studying Leon for a moment before he spoke. You're the one the Fangs have their eyes on. Leon nodded, his voice low. I need some help, something to even the odds. Mac chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Evening the odds in this place is a tall order. What are you after? Leon hesitated, his mind racing. Metal, glass, something sharp, anything you've got. Mac